I want to start with two premises. First, we're talking about disinformation, not misinformation. So misinformation is just people being wrong on the internet. Disinformation is actual manipulation. That way we don't have to debate that. Disinformation, here we go. Misinformation, we can have another panel, but today we're doing disinformation. Secondly, we're all agreeing it's a real problem. So we're not going to debate whether it's a problem. It's out there. OK, good. Let's get going. So, Dipayan, I want to start with where disinformation comes from. A couple people here who've written extensively about that, starting with Dipayan. You have a theory about where it comes from, and it's a pretty complicated but interesting theory about how it evolves from the core structure of social platforms. So let's get going with that, and then we're going to talk for 25, 30 minutes, and we'll go to audience Q&A.
Thank you, Nick. It's such an honor to be on such a distinguished panel. Disinformation is a very complicated issue. It is a tremendously complex issue. And there are two sides of it. And I think what one side we have to always acknowledge is that there is a universe of nefarious actors out there. They're always going to try to push disinformation at every single person in America, at specific pockets of the population here, and in other places around the world. And that is their job. That is their role. They want to subvert political integrity. And there's very little that the global community, at least right now, at this stage, can do about that. So that's the first thing. That's the first element that I think we all have to acknowledge. The second piece of this, really, is that there is a corporate infrastructure underlying the internet that really aids and abets and perpetuates and proliferates the spread of disinformation. And this is the disinformation that is being pushed out there by Russian disinformation operation agents and all other nefarious actors. And that's really premised on the core underlying infrastructure of the services that we all use every day, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or any other major consumer internet company and service. And it's really premised on the collection of data about individuals, let's say American voters, which is used to create behavioral profiles about individuals so that disinformation operators can start creating audience segments, specific classes of the population that they wish to shower disinformation on because they believe that it will resonate with them, and they can not only pay for those people to see it, but those people will react to it and organically, meaning for free, reshare that content and spread it around and be impacted by it and impact their spheres with it. That is the core of this all. And the key here is that the interests, the commercial interests of internet platforms like Facebook and those of disinformation operators are at some points aligned, in some ways aligned. Specifically what I mean is that it's in both of their interests to engage the individual for as long as possible on these platforms, to get them scrolling through the news feed. For the internet platform, it allows them to create more ad space and collect more data, and that's their core business. That composes 99% of the revenues for major internet companies. For disinformation operators, it allows them to try to persuade the individual. And that alignment is what we need to really try to solve quickly and in the longer term as well.
All right, Renee, is that true? Does the underlying structure of social platforms make disinformation inevitable or perpetuate disinformation?
Yes. So one thing I would add to that.
All right, well,
next question.
Well, I know we talk a lot about ads. My areas of interest really are actually groups in the recommendation engine. I actually see those as much more deeply problematic features, largely because if I want to run a campaign, I can either build up my own audience, as we saw the Russians do over years, period of years, and that involves some ads, drive people to a page, make them like the page. You can push them to a group. So I think about this a lot as like decentralized cults almost, the same type of recruiting mechanism. You don't need the charismatic leader because you can do it quite anonymously at this point. But ultimately, when you get people into groups, you can reach them. you can really reach them. And so you don't have to even create your own group. You can simply co-opt a group that already exists at this point, which is why I actually think a lot of the ways that we think about this problem is this idea that money and ads are, that they're absolutely part and parcel to it, but I do think that there are a lot of ways to spread disinformation that have absolutely nothing to do with ads. And that's because once the groups exist, anyone can co-opt them. We see subtle influence deployed a lot of the time through sock puppets, fake accounts, personas. A lot of the really effective Russian campaigns were done one-on-one. One-on-one, the Russians identified a high-value organizer, and they simply started to reach out to that person and develop a relationship. This is a straight-up Cold War spy tactic, just that it's being carried out on a social platform. Another thing we see with recommendation engines, the reason I find them so deeply destructive, is that when a group achieves a certain size, the recommendation engine picks it up and pushes people into it on its own. So again, once you've got your group of a certain size, Facebook's going to do some of the heavy lifting for you. Twitter's going to do the same thing. You follow one jihadi. We saw this during the ISIS debates. You follow one jihadi, Twitter would tell us it's so hard for us to find these accounts. No, the recommendation engine finds it for you. I follow one jihadi and it serves me up 5 more. You might like this, you might like this, you might like this. And the reason for that is because in order to keep you on the platform and keep you engaged, they're constantly pinging you with a whole bunch of different things just to see what you're going to go for. So one of the examples I use a lot is I have a bunch of accounts that pay attention to anti-vax content, and they were getting served Pizzagate groups. Long before Pizzagate was a massive public story, my anti-vax accounts, accounts that were active in anti-vax groups, just listening, just sitting in those accounts, the recommendation engine was saying to me, hey, have you heard about this thing called Pizzagate? You might like that. And so we see this as like a radicalization pathway, and it really makes the work of people who want to spread a particular point of view, it's incredibly easy for them. They don't even have to spend money or run ads.
How many bot accounts do you run?
No comment.
I would like a complete tally of Renee DiResta's sock puppet accounts by the end of this panel. Noam, do you agree with this? Do you agree that it's an underlying struggle?
I do. Yeah, I like the analogy I think about is and I kind of associate the recommendation engines are all about scale and being automated and using algorithms. And I think about, like, imagine if someone went to a library and said, I want to read Mein Kampf. Where is that? And a librarian might help you read it, but a librarian might also say, what's troubling you, son? Can we talk about it? Or you're looking for all the Nazi literature. Or you're historical. I think it's that minimizing of the human element. The idea that we are like all individual actors, just doing our thing, going searching for truth by ourselves and getting recommended things. And there's no sense that we can learn from each other and have a community that of not just our own, pre-selected, algorithmically selected. And I guess basically the point is the algorithms are so crude in how they do it. They are lacking in that sophistication. Like, you're interested in Mein Kampf, maybe you should talk to someone who knows a lot about history. They would be good for you, rather than like, he also likes Mein Kampf. You should go talk to him. He can tell you all about it. So I think it's definitely structural, and the fact that it aligns that way with their interests, because the breaking up of selling such targeted advertising is, I bear your point that it's not all about advertising, but that's why they're so good at dividing people.
Yes.
And it's that incentive that's so troubling, and it seems like it's just a wrong path, So.
Cash, do you want to weigh in on how? Actually, let's move this on to the next topic. We've kind of identified how this stuff spreads, how disinformation spreads, and fortunately, we've tied it to the fundamental core parts of companies that have created trillions of dollars in value. So it should be very easy to solve. Cash, do you want to talk about how this is going to evolve? Because we're at one of the things I like to think about is that we're at this stage, like during the last election, we got manipulated by text, right? We got an internet that's going to be all video soon, and then we're going to have virtual reality, and then we're going to have Neuralink, right? They're all going to be like in our brains. So explain where we're going with how disinformation is going to spread.
Yeah, my worry is, okay, so we've perfected the technique of, building data broker lists of suckers or finding the right groups online. We found very effective ways of targeting them, and now we're seeing the development of new technologies like deepfakes, where you can, create a video of somebody that looks very authentic. We're seeing audio impersonation, where you can, have my voice saying something that I've never said. And I see the tech companies pushing into this, and they're really excited about it. And it feels like they're not aligning that with what is already happening with disinformation and recognizing the really problematic issues it's going to create for us. So, we have Google developing Duplex right now, where you can have this automated assistant call a hair salon for you, and it sounds like a human because it says and it pauses. It doesn't sound like Alexa. It doesn't sound like Siri. So now you have an artificial assistant that can sound human, and you have the ability to impersonate people you could have really targeted calls to people, making it sound like it's a politician or even a person they know. And so I am just really worried about the evolution of this and the fact that we're just kind of diving headlong into it without really considering the repercussions.
All right, well, I want to ask how we dive headlong into its safety. Where can we get our water wings? But as we talk about it, let's talk specifically about Google I/O. When they introduced that voice assistant, which clearly has the potential to be used for disinformation, how should they have done it differently? Explain in a little more detail what they did, and then explain how you would have liked them to have done it.
Well, one way that they demonstrated it is they just, had the assistant making an appointment somewhere, and at least in the way that they played it, it didn't identify itself as a virtual assistant. They wanted it to seem authentically human, and I don't think that originally Google was willing to commit to saying that every time this bot called somebody, it would say it was an assistant, and then after the negative
clearly
backlash.
not, because they didn't do that during the demonstration. They only did it after 26 million people tweeted at them.
Right, yeah. After the negative backlash, they decide that they maybe should disclose that to people. And I see that happening a lot. Like, we want to fool people into thinking that robots are human. It's actually the goal of a lot of these companies, a lot of these startups. And so I think we need to rethink that entirely. The problem is once you have bad actors, we can get at least technology companies to embrace that philosophy that when you're presenting somebody with something that's not human, you tell them that. But I worry about what bad actors ultimately do with that technology.
Also make your restaurant reservations less efficient if you do that. But no, you're right.
Yeah, you can say they can be more honest, but the whole use of AI, is to manipulate. So even you could argue the recommendations feature isn't someone pretending to be a voice, but it's still sort of saying, I know you, I've really studied you, and I've got a good advice for you. And that's things we associate with people or friends. And so the idea of saying the voice can be, or it can come with a disclaimer, it's the whole project is to impersonate people. And in my book, I sort of talk about the history of AI, that it started with a very sincere belief that a thinking machine could actually solve the world's problems. Why are we here? How big is the cosmos? If Einstein could understand half of it, a machine smarter than Einstein would understand all of it. But instead, they realized that basically all it could do is imitate a person. And that's what allows it to sort of be used to manipulate. Because once you can pretend to be a person, you can really get people to trust. And there was a really early episode in the 60s where someone wrote the first chatbot, and his secretary was talking with her, was supposed to be a therapist. And she's doing it, and he looks over her shoulder, and she's like, excuse me, can I have some privacy? And he's like, you're talking to a computer. What do you mean? But she was like, she was talking about her life. And he realized people are going to put a lot of faith in computers. And it made him very scared. And he flipped, this guy, Joseph Weizenbaum, became a real critic of AI. I think it's like these are broader issues than even the mere technical details. It's like the whole project is about manipulation.
Wow, there's an element. Okay.
I'm
the moderator, but just
here. I'm speaking for yes.
As someone with children who are about to drive cars, the idea that you can use AI to make cars a lot safer, that sounds pretty good. There are a lot of wonderful benefits to this stuff, but let's stick on disinformation. Okay, so just like to pause for a second and say I work for a magazine about technology, and some of this tech is awesome. All right, let's talk, but we're back on disinformation. Disinformation exists, disinformation is not awesome. Okay, so now that we've identified the problems with disinformation and where it comes from, how do we solve it? Let's start with what the company should do to solve it. So, Dipayan or Renee, you want to take this?
One of the things that we saw in 2016, one of the, or even before that, actually, I would say 2015, when we were trying to deal with the ISIS stuff, before the Russia stuff was really well known. I will say within the government, the conversation was about ISIS, but the ways that we were trying to think of, like, how can public-private partnerships be put in place to share some information? This is, of course, after the Snowden revelations. The relationship is quite toxic. The tech companies don't want to be seen as doing the work of the government. You have the EFF arguing that moderation is censorship. There was things were not good in 2015 when we had these kind of formative opportunities to intercede. Public-private partnerships, I think, are absolutely key. I think that there's nobody has the complete picture. This was something that we saw when we were working on the Russia investigation. Actually, was the idea that independent researchers were finding these caches on the internet, pieces of content, evidence of manipulation, accounts that were still active, and we were developing a picture of what we saw. The tech platforms, to varying extents. At the time, they've since become much more diplomatic and willing to engage, but at the time it was very much like they're not seeing the whole picture, they don't know what they're talking about. We had arguments quite publicly about this is only $100,000 worth of ads. This was a very small number of people who saw it. No, we've got your CrowdTangle data. It says 130 million people saw it at least, and that's only 6 pages. And there was this, I think that the only way that we move forward on this is this almost like triangle of like independent researchers who study the system, researchers at the platforms who have deep knowledge of what exists on their own platforms. I would say that on the outside, we can see kind of production of content, dissemination of content. What they can see that we don't have access to is absorption of content. To what extent is this influencing people? To what extent are they going on to do other things? To what extent is it having an impact? And then there's the third piece, which is the government, which has some awareness of threat detection, particularly in the geopolitical and the terrorist component that they get from their own intelligence operations. So really the solution, I think, is actually better information sharing. I know that triggers some people who get worried about privacy and such, but I don't think that there's any way to do it other than to treat it as an information war.
And the whole Cambridge Analytica thing came from information sharing with the Cambridge academic. So you're just going to have a few
of course,
checks and balances on that system.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so information sharing, good solution, get started. But what about at the algorithmic level? What about at the business structural level? What else needs to be done? Dipayan and then Cash?
Sure. Well, I think that if you believe the theory that the business model at play here for the major social media companies and internet companies is premised on the uninhibited collection of data, the creation of behavioral tracking profiles to assist in creating ad revenue for these companies, and then the creation of opaque algorithms to curate content and create those recommendation systems as well as route those ads. I think the answer, the antidote, in the longer term has to be one of regulation, because the industry has grown in this direction because it's where the highest profit margins lie, and it's done so in a space that is a regulatory Wild West. There's not really a cop on the beat that has the resource or even, you could say, jurisdiction to oversee adequately this industry. And I think the answer really lies in two things that need to be joined together, privacy and competition policy, which I think can lead to the creation of a new contract for the individual in the face of the industry. I want to jump back very briefly also to the changes that we're going to see. In 2016, 2015, the Russians didn't really do anything that was particularly sophisticated, and in fact, some of the folks here have written about that, I think. And it brings me back to artificial intelligence. What's governing the recommendation systems underlying all of these companies and their business models is artificial intelligence. It's machine learning to understand the individual and predict what he or she will want to see at the top of the newsfeed. And that whole capacity is only going to increase over this year and into the future. Mark Zuckerberg did a very interesting and brilliant thing. He did a round of interviews shortly after the Cambridge Analytica incident, including with the brilliant Nick, who conducted one, and as well as with some other outlets. And he pivoted in discussing artificial intelligence. He talked about how AI is going to be the antidote to disinformation because the companies are going to be able to detect fake news and hate speech and so on and so forth. What he didn't really shed light on is the fact that the real reason these companies are all developing AI is to feed it back into what composes 99% of their revenue. There's no other reason for them to really have a corporate interest in developing it. It is to curate those recommendation systems. And the fact is that I think with the global regulatory system evolving as it is with GDPR and locking down data within the walls of Google and Facebook and others, in combination of the fact that we don't have a regulatory cop on the beat to really oversee the industry as it develops AI and collects data on an ongoing basis, we're going to see the disinformation problem potentially be exacerbated as we move forward over the next couple of years.
All right, so we have a couple of solutions on the table. We have better data sharing, we have regulation, competition, and privacy, but let's get to that later. Let's talk about the algorithms and the AI, because isn't the solution to this better, different algorithms, better, different use of AI, better data points on this. I mean, and remember, the interest of these companies is to get rid of disinformation. It is profoundly bad for these companies that this stuff exists because it makes people not want to use the platforms as much. Well, at least there's part of it that is profoundly bad. All right, Cash, Noam, Renee,
Go, Sorry.
fire away.
I mean, AI and algorithms are bad. Like, a lot of times they make mistakes. What these platforms have historically done has been to outsource this to their users, right? Like, flag this tweet, report this post. I'm a journalist, so I'm way better at criticism than solutions. But I really wonder if this is going to just push us deeper into the reputation economy, where we are just asking users all the time to be rating other people, rating information that they're seeing, saying whether this person is reliable or this person isn't. And basically I think clout shut down at the wrong time.
Wait, you're defending clout on the stage? That's my favorite moment of the whole Ask and Ideas Festival.
But I mean, that sounds crazy, but we're...
what we're just saying, yeah.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but we're already seeing it. This was Facebook's solution, right? They said, we're going to have this kind of trust matrix for news publications, and they asked their users, they sent out a poll and asked their users to rate the trustworthiness of these publications. So I kind of wonder if we're just going to be pushed deeper into that. Your Uber rating and your Airbnb rating and everything just adds up to how much your words are trusted online.
But you'll do great. Cash Hill, for people who don't know, once ran a story where she created a business and then created a whole bunch of sock puppets that highly rated it in order to prove
I
a point.
hired somebody to make the sock puppets.
So you are going to be able to do that for your... When Elon Musk launches Pravda, you're going to be the highest rated journalist on it because you're going to be able to manipulate it.
I can't believe Elon Musk isn't calling it flamethrower.
I know. All right, back to regularly scheduled programming. Noam, you wanted to jump in there, and then Renee.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to say that it might even mean maybe we're kind of stopping too short with AI because I think we keep talking about the Russians and the kind of influence they were doing, but I mean, we have to deal with the fact that the Trump campaign as well was spreading disinformation, right? And the actors aren't always outside of us. And I mean, I don't know what are you in this discussion of disinformation is saying that his inauguration was the largest attended. Is that misinformation? Is that disinformation? Is that something that shouldn't be allowed to be spread? Is that, I mean, we are, I think, just to build that point, is just that I think we even talk about, the problem might just be the scaling and having everything be in one place, and that there might just not be a solution like that. And if you don't really have a system of checks and balances of your peers and neighbors, I mean, having written a book, I was sort of asked, you got to think, what are you going to suggest? As a journalist, I don't really mind as good as proposals as criticisms, but I mean, fundamentally, it seems like making things more local and smaller and having more of a human element in all of these things are the only way out. And it's not, you can't, there's no other real path. There won't be a technical solution for it, but it's my 2 cents.
The thing I was thinking about actually through a lot of this was Amazon, which I want to allude to very briefly because it's not disinformation, it is misinformation, but it's the way that collaborative filtering, which is the algorithm that decides that you are like this person, which means that what that person engages with, you want to see. Amazon, when you go to the page and you look at it, you see people who liked this also liked, and then it shows you related content. People who liked this also bought, which shows you where the conversions happen. People who, you see advertisements for related products. Amazon is like 6 different types of recommendation engines operating at any given time to make that sale. When you leave the platform, you're pinged again over email. If you ever look at a shoe, like it's going to follow you around the internet until you go back and buy it, right? And then it's still going to follow you around the internet. But the reason I think about Amazon is because when we talk about reputation, we talk about reviews, you have to realize that that vast quantities of Amazon reviews are completely 100% fake, including the verified ones. They're brokered in Facebook accounts. They're brokered in Reddit. They are done for money. It flies under the radar. The reason I talk about information sharing is because it is so difficult to catch these things unless you're looking at the system for the manipulation. And that's where all of the reputational things in the world are easily gamed. It's like turtles all the way down. You can just, you create a new system for checking it, and someone's going to go and they're going to manipulate that. This is why it is a systemic problem, and it is something that is only shared by looking holistically at the entire ecosystem.
Okay, but so there's a systemic problem, and the bad actors are there creating the fake accounts. Don't we just have to get better? It's an arms race. Bad guys and the good guys.
It's absolutely an arms
race. The good
race.
guys have to get better. So that's the solution, right?
Facebook does believe that a lot of things fall out of taking down fake accounts, and I do agree with them to some extent on that. The challenge, and one of the things why it's actually easier to talk about Russia and ISIS, is because when you talk about things like domestic ideologues, you're dealing with real people who are happy to do it in true name. And that's where you start to get at the issues of like, how do we decide what content people see? How do we decide what topics are recommended? Is there a do not recommend list where we think more strategically about things that are allowed to exist and have sort of a First Amendment protection, even if they're wrong, even if they're lies, they're still protected, but perhaps they're not served up proactively. Perhaps they don't move through the algorithmic recommendation system to find people. I think that actually the domestic ideologues are the hardest part of all of this.
Yeah, right. I will say I created this fake business called the Freaking Awesome Karaoke Express, which was a karaoke like food truck. The acronym was fake, and I created sock puppets on Twitter and Facebook users and Yelp reviews. And Yelp actually detected that the reviews were fake reviews. So I was really impressed by that. I was like, oh, Yelp is solve this problem. And then a computer science professor and his students created a new Yelp review maker that trains itself on the Yelp reviews that have been filtered. So it's the best of the best that it's trained on. So then they've created reviews that can full Yelp. So it is an arms race. And
so now we've got another solution. We've got information sharing as a solution. We've got regulations, potential sharing, and we've got like better algorithms that can identify the fake accounts based on analyzing Yelp and everything else.
But then better algorithms that can make more disinformation based on what's risen to the top.
Yeah.
It's a cybersecurity problem. Information ops is a cybersecurity problem. I feel like I say that like 10,000 times, but it is. And so a lot of the solutions look to things like cybersecurity, which has pen testing, where people are saying, come break my system, come break my algorithms. I think that's the only way that you get ahead of that, is by testing the system and saying like, okay, you're going to make me disclose who I am to sell an ad. Well, here's how I'm going to get around your ads interface entirely.
Well, isn't the way that YouTube used Wikipedia was a kind of way of just, it bothered me on like kind of the ethical grounds that here's this community that built itself up, hard work, and then YouTube was sort of saying we're going to use these Wikipedia assessments to sort of to inform people when they look at YouTube videos. But that is in essence trying to like take a community, that's something I've written a lot about Wikipedia, where it took years, and they have principals, and they have dedicated volunteers, and they use bots as well to catch things, but fundamentally it's a humanly curated group, and that, I guess, is a way they were kind of outsourcing the whole question of how people behave to this project that it kind of solved it to a degree. I believe Wikipedia is highly reliable, and it's kind of a miracle that they pulled it off.
The context is Susan Wojcicki. I was actually interviewing her on stage at South by Southwest. That was me. It was hilarious. And she said, well, one thing we're going to do when there's fake news on YouTube is we're going to show Wikipedia links. Like if something comes up and it's questionable, right? Like there's a video that says humans didn't walk on the moon, it will link to the Wikipedia page. Which I on stage was like, well, Wikipedia can obviously be manipulated, but it's basically true. I kind of thought that's like a smart idea, but it's a messy smart idea. And then the rest of the internet was like, that's the worst thing we've ever heard. But you kind of defended it in that very smart Washington Post piece.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I did defend it. I mean, it's funny. It also is good because you'll notice that there were a couple of little mini scandals where I think a congresswoman in California was called a Nazi, and they're like, oh, that's because
the entire
Wikipedia
Republican Party.
Oh,
the entire Republican Party.
Were called Nazis, and it was because they would say, oh, that's Wikipedia. Someone quickly edited that. So it gave them also a good scapegoat. No, I thought it was a great idea. I'm a believer that Wikipedia really works, and I think it's hard to dispute that. It's highly reliable. People use it all the time. It's highly sourced, and it's very carefully watched. I know from talking to people there, they take it incredibly seriously. I just thought it was really kind of head-scratching that here's this huge company that makes billions of dollars a year relying on a volunteer project to sort of do the heavy work. It made me wonder what would happen with the talented Google engineers and all the money they have if they'd try to create a real wholesome community and like actually put that investment into it. Because I think having a great community is really good. Wikipedia is really good, and they could have done that rather than kind of piggybacking. I think there is a fear that Wikipedia could be hurt by this because once people know that they're going to be given such cachet, they're going to try to actually politicize Wikipedia in a way that they've managed to sort of tamp it down. It's kind of amazing how it kind of puts all their arguments are on these other pages, and the actual article itself is usually quite reliable and quite useful.
I love that. I just want to tack on to that and say that I completely agree with Noam. I think Wikipedia is very reliable. I also think it's a great resource in the YouTube context for users who go and look for it. I'd also put that whole solution that YouTube CEO put forward, I put that in the same bucket as, for example, political ad transparency, which is another, it's another short-term solution, meaning solution that, or rather not solution, but measure that can be taken in the next few months, let's say, to at least address the problem of disinformation. And in fact, Facebook has taken some steps forward on that measure too, with the introduction of its transparency around issue ads. Senators Warner and Klobuchar and McCain have also been pushing this thing called the Honest Ads Act. which would try to institute the same kind of standard across the board. I think that transparency is important, but I don't think transparency is going to solve the problem of disinformation, because it doesn't address the fact that there are just so many people out there who are trying to cause harm to political institutions and to political integrity.
All right, let's go into government regulation, because we got a few minutes left, and I do want to hit this. Dipayan, you've mentioned privacy regulations and competition regulation. Competition, I believe, is a code word for antitrust, but it's a much nicer way to say that. Does one of the other three of you in this panel want to weigh in on how the companies should and will be regulated?
There's a bot bill in California right now.
The privacy bill?
No.
There's a bot bill?
The privacy bill's today. Today is
Right.
like the defining moment for that. The bot bill. There's a federal attempt to do it too. I think I'm not sure if that's going to go forward. There's it's a disclosure bill. Senator Hertzberg, who also introduced the privacy bill, introduced the bots bill. It's it's a really interesting approach. I am going to bore you all by saying I'm deeply conflicted about it, but I think it has a lot of potential.
What is the bot
Oh, I'm
bill?
sorry. So in the state of California, it would mandate the disclosure of automated accounts. Now,
You're going to be screwed.
Move to another state.
actually, no, it's funny because the EFF was the one who came out and said, no, that's too broad. So now I believe that in the last iteration that I've seen, the last amendments they took for commercial purposes, for the purposes of selling someone something, or for the purposes of influencing an election, or now the narrow tailoring. But what it says is if you are if there are these automated accounts, there has to be a system by which regular users can tell the tech companies, can flag these accounts basically, and then the companies have to investigate the accounts. It also creates a framework where the state attorney general can request information about manipulative botnets and so on and so forth. So they're going for disclose, don't ban. It's a kind of a morass. It's when you get into the details with this stuff, it's so hard because you're like, well, what is a bot? What percentage of the time does the account have to be automated to count as a bot? I periodically will queue my articles so they tweet out at a particular time of day. Am I a bot when that's happening? Yes. Or is it? We were saying maybe they just disclose the percentage of time the content is moving through an API or coming through in an automated capacity. This is something that Twitter is very seriously thinking about themselves. So it's interesting because a lot of the time the regulatory conversation is more to create the credible threat of regulation to facilitate the platform taking action that it perhaps could have done voluntarily but did not. And we saw that with Honest Ads Act also when it was introduced. You saw Facebook come out and say we're actually going to disclose everything and give you an API too.
And GDPR.
Yeah.
I think what's hard with regulation is that it tends to only apply when you have the intersection of disinformation and commerce. Yeah. So, we've seen the New York Attorney General went after people that had a kind of big fake review ring set up. And they were selling fake reviews to restaurants, helping them get their ratings up. But when you're selling, you're trying to sell a politician or you're selling an idea, it's, I think, harder for the government to get involved because of speech issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dipayan or Noam, you want to take on the competition issue?
Well, can I start one more regulatory thing? I
Fire away.
A piece I wrote was about how there were real questions about whether the Voting Rights Act was violated through the way ads were placed on Facebook. And so that's a case of a real regulation, where we have rules about how elections are supposed to be run. And you get the sense that it's just the Wild West. And you're right that usually commerce is what drives it. But fair elections, I remember watching the hearing with Amy Klobuchar, sort of talking to the general counsels of all these companies and saying, we're a representative democracy. It's really important. Elections are really important to us. And that's something that you wouldn't think you'd have to explain that's something we regulate. And it's really, and I think when we talk about regulations, where we don't include that, that's a very important piece of regulation that we have to think about. All the existing societal values we have to be applied there. So that would be my 2 cents. And you want to go talk about competition?
Sure. Well, I think competition and privacy are really interlocked, interwoven issues for this particular sector. Really, when I say competition, what I mean is that we have a method and mechanism for antitrust enforcement and competition policy enforcement in the U.S., which applies to companies in other sectors. We don't really have one that can really treat this sector. So, for example, when an internet company might try to purchase another internet company, we don't really have a regulatory hook for any of the regulatory relevant agencies to use to go after them, because that's just not the way. Antitrust enforcement has been premised on looking at pricing for consumers, and the internet companies contend that their services are free. So, so I think we need to step back for a second, see that they are creating tremendous economic value in our market, and globally so, and we need to figure out a way to treat this. I think a couple of things can be helpful here, and I'll just mention them briefly. First is better scrutiny on acquisitions and mergers, and sharing of data across an internal universe of platforms like, let's say, Messenger and WhatsApp and the Big Blue app. Another issue here is data portability. People have been talking about public trusts that can hold data for individuals. I think this is really about putting power back in the hands of the individual, the voter, the consumer, whoever it might be, to have a little bit more power in the face of the industry.
We're going to go to Q&A in just a minute, but before we do that, I want some suggestions from the panel on what citizens can do, what the people in this room can do to help in the war against disinformation, because, you know, for every Russian bot, there's a human. So let's get some uplifting things that citizens can do, and then let's go to Q&A.
I usually say, oh, did you want to go into line?
No,
go
I
ahead.
didn't know. Oh, well, thanks. You know, wow. I guess all the solutions I would have would be things that would be about going offline and kind of connecting with your neighbor, and that's not really what you're asking for, huh? So what can citizens do?
Don't use the internet.
I guess they can contribute to Wikipedia and make it even more more vital and accurate, and that way help you to, you know, do a good job in vetting its content.
That's a good one.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Good.
I always go with like, look at what you share, check what you share.
Down
It's
with
so
that.
easy to fall prey to that kind of confirmation bias. And with check what you share, I think it's also really important. We have this weird kind of societal norm on the internet where it's bad to push back on something, but when you do see your great aunt sharing that article that's, you know, Hillary Clinton is running a sex ring in the basement of a pizza place, being that person to say, well, actually, auntie, like, that's not true.
I think it's hard to think of a solution for consumers that can scale, which is why I think the onus should not be on consumers. I think it should be on the industry to really, and the government to educate consumers as to how this whole ecosystem works, what they're really exchanging for access to these services, and the societal tensions that they can germinate.
I think that we live in a meta-information universe where a lot of the information we consume is the version of it that somebody has summarized on Facebook or the tweet about it. So I would just encourage people to go back and read the source articles and the source materials and make sure that the summary you're seeing is accurate.
Click on the links to Wired.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Journalism.
If anybody has questions either from themselves or their sock puppets, whoa! All right, well, the first question is over here.
So one thing I have not heard, my name is Emmanuel. I work for...
Oh, wait, and let's wait for the microphone because we are going to, there's a video, and we'd like those folks to watch and to get it.
I'm just so excited. So my name is Emmanuel. I work for NORC at the University of Chicago. Actually, I'm on leave from there, but I work there. We do social media research. So what I have not heard is partnerships with academics. Yeah. Our group, the Health Media Collaboratory, was very early on, and it took us so long because of the methodology, making sure that it's transparent, it's replicable, and we found out how hard it was, and that's why it took us, since we've been working on it since 2012, and now we finally have a product that we can sell, but it's about selling the value. And back when the Big Boulder Initiative still existed, that's where that exchange had happened. So, I mean, I'm inviting for more collaboration and wondering why it hasn't happened yet.
Renee?
I can probably take that one. When I talked about that like kind of triangle of collaboration, when I said researchers, that includes academics. I was just at Ford Foundation. There was a huge convening of researchers there. Some are academics, some are not. One thing that's really interesting, I am not an academic. I have an affiliation with an institution, but I'm not an academic myself. We joke around about this split between the research community. There are those of us who joke around about how like we publish in BuzzFeed, that's our journal. And that's because we see it as like, this is happening now, this is an immediate threat, we need to get this out there now. And so we do share anecdotes and we do share screenshots and we do share things where we don't have a longitudinal peer-reviewed 3-year-long study of the ethnography of a community. And that's in part because we feel that some of the work that I did on the anti-vaxxers during the California bill then comes out as a paper in Nature 3 years later. I think that's absolutely fantastic because it kind of validates what we have, but there's really a place for like both types of research. Like somebody said, like, oh, you disinfo researchers are all just bad ethnographers. Why aren't you hiring ethnographers? Yeah, and I thought that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. I don't see myself as an ethnographer at all. I see myself as identifying a threat and trying to call attention to it. And for a very long time, the media is all that we have had to call attention to those threats. So there does have to be, when I talk about researchers, I do mean academics as well, for looking at, Sinan Aral and some of the others who've been doing this work for years, bringing that into the conversation.
All right, well, let's move on because we only have about 5 minutes and we have a bunch of hands. Let's go Anya in the back in green.
Hi guys, thanks for a great panel.
Wait, but hold on, wait for the microphone for the sake of our video viewers.
Thanks for a great panel. You all talked about how disinformation proceeds from the business models of these companies. And you also praised Wikipedia, which is a donor-supported nonprofit. Is there any prospect for other business models, such as nonprofits or public-funded internet models that would allow us to engage in, and would that make for a less disinformation universe?
This is a great question at a nonprofit institution in the Booz Hamilton room in the Koch building.
I'll take that initially, just briefly. I think it's hard to see it. It's very hard to see it, a different kind of business model emerging that can really compete with, let's say, one of the major internet companies and the services they provide. Because of how established this whole structure is, meaning the kind of the underlying economic underpinning of the consumer internet companies.
Wouldn't you say Internet.org is a good nonprofit that, which is this website goes way back, which has something called the Wayback Machine, which comes up very often where they basically keep a copy of every page, assuming it's not been blocked, and it's a very useful fact-checking site, and they are a nonprofit that need money all the time, and they are another kind of good check, not at the scale of a Google, but yeah.
In the back, in the black shirt. Yeah.
Thank you. Christian Picciolini. I help people disengage from violent extremism and hate groups. In September of 2016, I saw a lot of the things that you were seeing, a lot of the bots coming from Russia, but also very tied to neo-Nazis and MAGA. And I guess what I started seeing, and I haven't heard you talk about it, what I started seeing was something more nefarious than just trying to influence an election, is these real people who were running these bots were going to kind of safe zones on the internet, like depression forums, autism forums, gaming forums, and even talking to kids over headsets to recruit them. Is that something that you've seen? And I turned over that information to the FBI in October before the election, and they never called me back. It was 35 gigs of information, and it was pretty disappointing.
Doesn't that come up with Facebook? That I remember seeing in the hearing that people talk about Facebook would sell ads. You can kind of identify a group like people are depressed and sell them food or push other products. I think that is something. I think maybe one of the regulations would be like these categories are really nefarious and can't be allowed, basically.
Sorry, what I was trying to say is they're actually going to these forums to try and radicalize people to be lone wolves. So it's with that purpose, because they know a lot of the kind of psychological components match, what might be easy to manipulate.
Yeah.
Renee, you want to take that?
I think that's one of the biggest problems we face today, because it's also the concept of like when you kick certain groups of people off Twitter, they just go into an even more less visible, more consolidated area. And per your point, like we see this with radicalization, regardless of the ideology. It's an extremely common framework and a very common tactic. And I think that's where again, the major platforms try to deny safe haven and hope that it doesn't. They have less of a pool to recruit from, but they do just go to these forums and do that. And I think this is where researchers and Southern Poverty Law Center and others are trying to map that ecosystem and intercede where they can.
All right,
I've not seen that, and I would totally take that file.
Yeah.
And write about it.
All right, we're going to wrap this up because we are out of time. I hope you've all been radicalized in the fight against disinformation. To recap, our solutions include information sharing, particularly with researchers, cloud-like systems, Wikipedia systems, better turtles going all the way down, better AI systems, regulation, and just being better on the internet. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our amazing panel. Thanks for being here.